Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawalah ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Moving forward now, inshallah, with the second video of week 1. So we're continuing with our introductory theory and our 4% of the language that gives you over half of all your benefits, introducing the science of grammar, nahu. In the previous session, we highlighted for you the comprehensiveness of the Arabic language at the word level. The claim was that the majority of the meanings in Arabic do not come from the letters or the vocabulary, but instead they come from the patterns and the vowels and the grammatical structure. So that was done for you at the word level by presenting the Istansaru example, where we saw what looked like a single word conveying 7 meanings. And from those 7 meanings, only one was coming from the letters, and the rest of them were coming from either the vowels and the pattern, or from that ending, that wow at the end that was giving us the gender, the plurality, and the person of the one doing the verb. And in this session we're going to do something similar for grammar, culminating in the definition of grammar. So let's proceed. So sarf morphology is the science of classical Arabic that deals with the patterns and the endings, and it's mostly to do with verbs. And when one masters and knows sarf properly, then it gives them 30% of total comprehension. And the rules that govern the construction of verbs and the rules you would need in order to identify between verbs are not that numerous. There's only a couple of dozen, and they are masterable. You can quickly, efficiently, easily master them. So what we do in our opening 6 months is we spend more time on sarf and get that out of the way in order to phase it out at the 6th month of the program. So by that time, sarf has been exhausted, and you have all you need to identify any possible verb. Not only identify, but also create. So from the 150,000 verbs out there, there would not be a single verb that you would not be able to identify. And the thing is that dictionaries presuppose that you know this. Dictionaries assume that you know these rules of sarf, because without this knowledge, you wouldn't be able to properly access and benefit from a dictionary even. You see? So that's why this needs to be first. And a level of grammar is given up front, okay, in order to enable the reading of the text in the 3rd week of class. But we don't exhaust all of grammar in the opening few weeks, but instead only the densest portion is taught in the first 3 weeks, and then the most important aspects are taught later while the reading text is going on, only to be revisited again in much greater detail through the 132-page best book in the world for grammar, which is the highlight of the first year. And many students, they've commented and they said that the Hidayat al-Nahw recordings on their own are worth the price of admission. Okay, like that, just that 132-page book, cover to cover. Because I've taught it 19 times, and because I continue to reteach every year 3 times, and I gain new insights, so pretty much that's the definition of strength. So my strength is in that text. So we're going to get to that, inshallah. But before we get to that, we have to give you the overall framework and build some vocabulary, because that book is unvoweled. Okay, luckily it's a 0 vocabulary book. There's not much vocabulary in there, you see, but there is grammar, technical vocabulary, you see. So what we do in the opening days is we build some reserves, and that would be technical grammar vocabulary by classifying and subclassifying. So we're going to do a lot of that today, inshallah. Okay, and then as soon as we're out of the startup phase, then sarf is ongoing. Okay, and with the aim and the goal of exhausting it by the 6th month, and then sarf is phased out, no more sarf. And then after that, all the focus is on grammar. And while grammar is taking place, then the students are exposed to the principles of balagha at a basic level. And then that continues into the 2nd year, and it just builds from there. And then eventually you'll find yourself in the continuous growth phase, where you can begin accessing on your own, and you could be reasonably confident that you're not making mistakes. Okay. So recapping quickly, the example that was given in the previous video led to the definition that sarf has 2 halves. It talks about patterns, and it talks about endings. By patterns, we mean the particular configurations of vowels, and also we mean the non-base letters that can sometimes be there in order to enhance the meaning coming from the base. In the example in the previous video, that was the scene in the ta at the front that was giving us the notion of seeking. And patterns also means absence. So if one particular verb needs to have a particular letter at the front, and in another verb that letter's not there, then what that does is it rules out that verb, and it pinpoints and it narrows down the understanding of the verb that's in front of you. And we did that in the istansalu example. We ruled out imperfect by noting the absence of the prefix that needed to be there. So all of this, it gives us three things. It gives us tense, it gives us voice, and it gives us added connotations. Tense is past, present, future. Voice is active, passive. Active means that the verb is attributed to the doer, and passive means that the verb is attributed to the object and the doer is suppressed. Not relevant, not mentioned. Okay, added connotations includes a number of things. In our example, it was the notion of seeking, but in other examples, it could be hyperbole. Okay, like cutting versus shredding. It could be mutual nature of it, that each of the two people involved is both a subject and an object. So one's trying to kill the other, and the other's trying to kill the first. So that's fighting as opposed to killing. So qatala versus qatala. And then numerous other examples for that can be given. So it's an entire area of sarf, which we call paradigm connotations, based on the pattern. The pattern gives us the connotations, right? Okay. So in our istansalu example, that would be meanings 2 through 4. 2 through 4 were coming from the pattern, and then 5, 6, 7 were coming from the ending, which is the second area. The second area of sarf is to know the designated ending that needs to be there at the end of the verb to give us the gender, the plurality, and the person of the one doing the verb. So we know that the one doing the verb is a male. Is it a male or a female? Is it one? Is it two? Or is it a group? Because we also have a dual. And are we talking about them? Are we talking to them? Or are we ourselves the doer of the verb? And since the number is very large, and since the pronoun is attached to the verb so strongly that it looks like a single word, so both of these reasons combined call for a table. Thus, the heavy emphasis on verb tables. Memorizing them, practicing them, knowing them really well, and making the association between the number and the pronoun. So when I say number 10, you should know that that refers to when you're speaking to one female. Number 3 is referring to a group of males. Number 13 is the I one. Number 14 is the we one. Like that. Okay, so I did it, like effortlessly. And inshallah, about 2-3 weeks into it, you're going to be able to do it the same way I'm doing it. Okay, because of the amount that we practice. And a couple of things before moving forward, that in our Wednesday sessions when we practice the verb tables, we're going to be adding to the list of tables that we're practicing. So in week 1, we do only the madi, okay, the past tense verb simple. And then in week 2, we give you variations of the past tense, which takes us to 10 tables. And then in week 3, the imperfect verb is introduced. And then that continues for about 6-7 weeks, variations of the imperfect verb. And then eventually the command, followed by the prohibition. So at the end, you might have something around 40 tables. Okay, the table layout is the same for all of them, and that would be 14 conjugations that were given to you in the previous video. So our task now would be to fill the slots, and we'll do that for the past tense verb in the third video of week 1. And when you sit, you need to memorize that. Okay, so get your head around the layout and understand the way it's structured. The third person ones are at the top, the second person ones are in the middle, and I and we is at the bottom. And then spend about 30 minutes on it to memorize it. Okay, and then the passive and the negatives and the variations of the past tense, you don't sit again to memorize. You don't spend the same amount of time. You memorize once, and you spend 2 minutes on each one. Note the slight differences. You see? So it's very manageable. The actual memorization only happens twice. So if there's 40 tables, you don't memorize 40 times. You only memorize twice. You memorize the very first past one, and you memorize the very first imperfect one. And then everything beyond that would be noting slight differences, and that is the function of the intellect according to Imam al-Ghazali. He mentions in one of his books, the criterion of knowledge is Ma'yarul ilm, Ma'yarul ilm fi fann al-mantiq. Over there he mentions the entire purpose and function of the intellect is to note the differences between things which are seemingly similar, and to note the similarities between things which are different, significantly different. So this is what I try to do in most of my teaching. I try to highlight differences, and you'll see a lot of that today too, when we classify and when we subclassify. So today's presentation is about grammar. Grammar is when you have words and you're connecting them together in order to create meaningful sentences. So words, sentences, and phrases is the subject matter of grammar. People speak, they speak in sentences, and sentences are made up of words and phrases. So if you know everything there is to know about the word, everything there is to know about the sentence, and everything there is to know about the phrase, then that's pretty much all of grammar. So throughout this presentation, the second one, we're going to highlight for you the comprehensiveness of the Arabic language at the sentence level. and then we're gonna begin with the mapping. So topic number 1, highlight the comprehensiveness of the Arabic language at the sentence level. Topic number 2, begin the mapping. Okay, at the top layer mapping, like basic mapping, and then subclassify the word, fully develop the word. So today's presentation is about the word, and then in week 2 we're going to speak about the phrase, and in week 3 we're going to speak about the sentence, and this will conclude our introductory theory. And by that point you will have the 2 most major topics in all of grammar, which are sentence specific, and if you've read the report then you're already exposed to it, and you're also going to know the solutions to both of those issues. And let's press forward. Okay, so the arranging of words to make meaningful sentences. The reason why this is important is because every language needs a mechanism and some method of being able to differentiate between the roles that the nouns are playing within a sentence. So if you have a verb and you have 2 nouns, you need to be able to tell which of the nouns, or you need to be able to indicate which of the nouns is the one doing the verb and which of the nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. Every language has a method for this. A lot of languages, they do it through extra words. So in addition to the verb and the 2 nouns, you're going to have a 4th and a 5th word. And this is how it's done in Urdu. So if you want to say Zayd hit Amr, you can't do it in 3 words. You need 5. You have to say Zayd ne, Amr ko mara. Mara means hit. And ne is a word and ko is a word. What is ne? It's a word in Urdu that's brought following a noun in order to indicate that that noun is the one doing the verb. And ko is a word in Urdu that's brought following a noun in order to indicate that that noun is the one upon whom the verb is being done, the object. So when I say Zayd ne Amr ko, the listener understands clearly that Zayd is the doer and Amr is the one upon whom it was done. Now if I flip those 2, the ne and the ko, leave everything else the same, and I say Zayd ko Amr ne, then Amr becomes the subject and Zayd becomes the object. So this is good, and there's also some problem with it. The good part is that I can rearrange the verb and the 2 nouns in 6 different ways. I could bring mara at the front, and I can flip between Zayd and Amr, and I could do numerous permutations. All permutations will be meaningful, and all 6 of them Zayd will be the subject, and in all 6 of them Amr will be the object, because it's not the sequence that's doing it, it's the ne and the ko, which are extra words. So it lacks comprehensiveness in the sense that what other languages can convey in 3 words, Urdu needs 5. But it has flexibility in the sense that the meaning could be conveyed in 6 ways, which is good because it allows you to stress. It allows you to assess the situation that the audience might already know that the action occurred, and they might already know who did the action, and the only new information you're giving them is that of the object. So you can say Amr ko Zayd ne mara. Amr ko Zayd ne mara, which would be more appropriate. In English you wouldn't be able to do that because subject, verb, object is the format they use in English. And the minute you bring Amr at the front and you delay Zayd, then Amr becomes the subject and Zayd becomes the object. So you don't need extra words in Urdu, in English, but the sequence is very rigid, and you can't convey the meaning in too many different ways. The method that the Arab people have developed in order to convey their grammatical meanings at the sentence level is the most superior method, because neither does it require extra words. You don't need a ne or a ko or equivalent of a ne and a ko. And also the sequence remains flexible. So literally, Zayd hit Amr could be done in 6 different ways. And I'm not saying all 6 are exactly the same. Clearly not, right? And when we revisit the discussion in week 3, I'm going to explain this further. That it's being done internally through some mechanism. A particular process that's likened to human emotions and facial expressions. Which if you've read the report, you've already been exposed to it. And inshallah we're going to develop some of it now at the end of this session, and more of it inshallah in week 3, and then you're going to start seeing the mechanism in action as soon as the book begins, and every encounter of the principles application will add to your clarity. So before you know it, you're going to know these discussions very well, inshallah. Okay, so we start with the mapping of the language, which means the most basic sound that comes out of the human mouth. That's called lafz, utterance. Okay, either it will have meaning or it won't. If it doesn't have any meaning, then that's just a random configuration of consonants and vowels. And the example of that would be words of other languages that the Arab people don't know. Like a Chinese word, as far as an Arab person is concerned, would be considered muhmal, meaningless. Or you can take the word Pepsi, for example, that now it has meaning. But prior to the invention of this now famous beverage, when that word was spoken, it was muhmal. It didn't have any assigned meaning. So when a group of syllables is assigned a meaning, then that's called coinage. So either your utterance has underwent a process of coinage or it hasn't. If it hasn't, then it's muhmal. And clearly we're not talking about muhmal. It's mentioned only for classification purposes. So all of our discussion will be on the right side. And that one's called mawdu', meaningful. And everything is included within meaningful. It could either be single, which is mufrad. Mufrad means single. Or kalima means word. And the rest of this presentation will focus on the word. Or it could be compound, and then compound further splits up into the phrase غير مفيد. غير مفيد means non-beneficial, or the sentence مفيد. When we say beneficial, when we say non-beneficial, we're talking about a particular type of benefit. When you join two or more words together in a manner that conveys to the audience a complete benefit, upon which silence is appropriate, then that's a sentence. And if it lacks this complete benefit upon which silence is appropriate, then that's called a phrase. Tall boy is an example of a phrase. Zayd's book is an example of a phrase. The boy is tall. The book belongs to Zayd are examples of sentences. And more on this when we speak about the phrase in the next week 2, and the sentence in week 3. Okay, so let's continue. Let's start developing the word. So the kalima, the word. Okay, now when speaking about parts of speech, there's a number of ways one can proceed. One can just list them, define them, give examples. That's one method, and it is a deficient method. And the better method to introduce the parts of speech is tell the audience that there's 3. Go ahead, give the names, but then you don't define the ism, the 3 parts of speech in Arabic. Don't begin defining them, but instead spend 5 minutes on the English parts of speech. It's possible that the one you're speaking to might know the English parts of speech, or you might need to remind them. But spending even 5 minutes on that is more productive than tackling the 3 parts of speech in Arabic directly. So this is what we're going to do. The 3 parts of speech in Arabic are called ism, fi'l, and harf. And at this stage, if you're seeing this for the first time, then obviously it doesn't mean much. Ism, fi'l, and harf. So in order to properly appreciate what they are exactly, let's go ahead with the English ones. So in English grammar, there's 8 parts of speech. There could be more, but for our purposes, 8 is sufficient. The first is the noun. What is a noun? A noun is a part of speech in English that refers to a place, a person, or a thing. So all people's names would be nouns. Countries would be nouns. Okay, objects, inanimate, animate, animals, they're all nouns. And the second is a pronoun. Pronoun is a smaller part of speech in English, which is used in place of a noun when it's already mentioned. And then there's numerous types of pronouns. Okay, like the personal ones, he, him, his, they, she, you, I, we. There's also interrogative pronouns like who and what that come at the beginning of the sentence and create a question. And then there's adverbial pronouns like when and where. And then there's numerous types of pronouns, but okay, that's the part of speech in English. The third is an adjective. An adjective is a word in English that's brought in order to modify a noun. Okay, like the word tall, or the word small, or the word lazy. So when I say boy, then it could mean any boy. But when I say tall boy, then I've removed boys that are below a certain height, and I've narrowed it down. I've modified it. So it's a word that modifies a noun. An adverb is a part of speech in English that modifies other than a noun, like a verb, for example. So came. So with that, I tag on the word quickly. Came quickly. So coming can happen swiftly. It can happen slowly. So that ly word, it modifies the verb. And then there's numerous types of adverbs, like generic adverbs, and then there's adverbs that are time and space specific, the answer to the question when and where. And there's also other types of adverbs which we'll talk about moving forward in week 3 when we revisit the topic again. So and even the word very is also an adverb, because if I say tall boy, then, or I could say very tall boy, and the word very modified tall. So it's not only verbs. It's not a word that describes a verb. It's a word that describes other than a noun, which includes verbs. It also includes adjectives like very tall, and it also includes other adverbs. Like an adverb can modify another adverb. Okay, like came extremely quickly. So the word quickly is modifying came, and extremely is modifying quickly. You see that? Okay, our fifth part of speech is the verb, and a verb is a word that indicates on action plus tense. And then we have prepositions, and a preposition is a small word that in English is brought in order to connect. Okay, better definition would be it's a word that brings out an attribute of the upcoming noun that otherwise cannot be understood. Like the word from. From means it's a preposition that indicates an origin. And being an origin is an attribute of a place. So if I say I traveled from Basra, then what the word from did is it brought out, or it indicated upon an attribute of Basra, that if I take away the word from and I say I traveled Basra, then that's not shown. Okay, it might mean I took a tour of Basra. So the origin meaning was dependent upon the use of the word from. And what is origin? It's an attribute of the upcoming noun. Okay, so every preposition is like that. So what it does is it brings out an attribute of the upcoming noun that could otherwise not be understood. Another example is the word by, or with, the word with. I wrote with the pen. So with is a preposition in English that indicates on the upcoming noun being a tool. So being a tool is an attribute of the pen. So I wrote with the pen. And if you just say I wrote pen, it makes no sense. Okay, our next part of speech in English is conjunction. A conjunction is like and or. And what it does is it allows abbreviation. So you don't have to repeat yourself. And you can just bring the verb once and then use the conjunction to combine between nouns. So you say Zayd and Amr came. So Zayd and Amr are together connected in the act of coming. And there's no need to repeat the word came twice. Okay, and there's numerous conjunctions in English, and they all have that commonality in that they all allow abbreviation. Like the word not, for example. What it does is it negates the upcoming. So if I say Zayd came to me, not Amr, then that affirms the coming of Zayd, but it negates the coming of Amr without the need to bring the verb came twice. So it allows abbreviation like that. Okay, more on this later when we speak about when we develop the topics further. Our eighth part of speech in English is the article, which is the word the, which comes at the beginning of the noun to show that it's particular, that it's a particular tree. When I say the tree, as opposed to a tree or an apple. Okay, so the word the word a, the word an, these are examples of articles. So now in English there's 8 parts of speech, and you're seeing them on the screen. In Arabic there's only 3. So how does that work? That works by taking these 8 and assigning them to the 3 in English. Okay, so our first part of speech is not just noun, it's actually all 4 of them. The noun, the pronoun, the adjective, and the adverb are grouped together in a single part of speech in Arabic, and it is labeled ism. The second one is exactly what the English people call verb. In Arabic we call it fi'l. Fi'l means verb. And then our third one is everything else. Everything else. Prepositions are included within it, conjunctions, articles, and if there's anything else in English grammar that I might not have listed, it would also be included within our third part of speech, which is called harf. Like the word yes, for example. If you try to categorize that in English, you might have some trouble with it. The word yes. I wouldn't have any trouble because I would just say it's a particle of affirmation. It's used in order to affirm an already existent statement. So somebody makes a statement and you say yes. So what you've done is you've affirmed that statement that is true, without the need for repeating it, right? So that's a harf. Okay, all prepositions are included within it. Conjunctions, articles, and also anything else that I might not have mentioned would be included within harf. Now, what we're going to do now, we'll give precise definitions for all 3 of them, the ism, the fi'l, and the harf, and tell you exactly what they are. But just by understanding what's on the screen right now, you're already 70-80% of the way there. Okay, you have a pretty good idea of what an ism is, a fi'l, and a harf. You don't have examples, not yet. We're going to give you examples in 3 or 4 more slides from now when we subclassify the ism. And then at the bottom, when we get the subcategories, at that point we'll start giving examples of the ism, the fi'l, and the harf. Okay, so let's press forward. The best way to introduce the definition of the 3 parts of speech is to grab onto the harf and understand that one first. Okay, this is the single point within this topic, and you can label it. It's called Introducing the Parts of Speech in Arabic. That's the name of the topic. In the previous video we gave you 3 topics. Introducing the comprehensiveness of the Arabic language at the word level. That was one topic. Introducing sarf along with this definition and its 2 major areas. And the third was the table layout. Okay, which also included the importance of tables, why we have them, why we need them. Okay, without filling the slots. In this presentation, we're mapping the language, which is the larger topic that we'll spend the majority of the session on. Within this, we have the introduction of the parts of speech. Okay, the best way to do it is to begin with the English parts of speech and assign them. And then ultimately you want to be able to define them, each one. The ism, precise definition. Fi'al, precise definition. Harf, precise definition. So what is defining? Defining is when you take things that belong to the same upper category and note their commonality and note their differences. So the commonality is they're all words and they all indicate on a complete meaning, and they've been assigned and they've been coined and they're not meaningless. So that's and they're single. So that's the commonality. Beyond that, from the three parts of speech in Arabic, the harf one is unique in the sense that it indicates on a meaning in something else. So if you understand what it means to indicate on a meaning in something else, then you can take that piece of information and it will unravel all three of them, because it would be the opposite of that that's contained within the ism and the fi'al, and then you just note the difference between those two and you'd have all three of them, right? Okay, so that from example I gave you a few minutes ago, I think it was sufficient in order to highlight that every harf will indicate on a meaning, because if there's no meaning, then it's muhmal, then we're not even talking about it, it's meaningless. So clearly there's a meaning. The difference is that the harf's meaning is in the surrounding words, it's not in itself. As opposed to tree, when I say tree, it is the tree which has the trunk and is leafy and it grows, so all of that is included within the same word, you see. Origin, on the other hand, is the meaning of from, but it's not from which is the origin, it's the upcoming noun which possesses the attribute of being an origin. And when and, A and D, indicates on gathering, it's not the and that's gathered, it's the zayd and the amr, the surrounding words, which have that meaning of being gathered. You see? Same thing with the word not, which indicates on negation, or the word but. What is but? But is a conjunction in English which indicates on, which deflects attention away from the previous statement and focuses it on the upcoming. So you see, it's the previous statement, it's the upcoming statement which bal indicates meanings on them, so that the speaker is not intending the previous one any longer, but instead the speaker wants to focus the attention on the upcoming. When you say but or however, the word however, yes, is an example of harf because it indicates on affirmation. Affirmation is the meaning which is in the statement that's being affirmed. You see that? So being a tool, being an origin, being a destination, being affirmed, being gathered. You see? So every harf is like that. If you run through the prepositions in English, run through the conjunctions in English, you'll notice that this is a commonality in all of them. And this is what distinguishes the harf from the other two, because both the ism and the fi'l indicate on meanings within themselves. So now we're ready to go ahead and define, and the difference between the ism and the fi'l would obviously be tense, in the sense that ism is not linked to time, whereas the fi'l is linked to time. The fi'l contains a tense. So here's all three of them for you. So ism is the part of speech in Arabic that indicates on a meaning in itself and is not linked to time, like the word tree or the word house. Fi'al is the part of speech in Arabic that indicates on a meaning in itself and is also linked to time, and then that time could be past, present, or future, like the word went indicates on going in the past, goes indicates on going in the present, and will go indicates on going in the future. So we have the act of going, and we also have the time that the going is happening in. So that's every verb is like that, and the harf has already been spoken about. So let's go ahead now and let's subclassify the ism, the fi'l, and the harf. So what we do now is we spend some time on each of those three. Okay, because they were very broad. The ism was not only noun. The ism was much more than noun. It also included adjectives. So if you're going to speak about the ism and subclassify it, then you can speak about it in consideration of the gender, that every ism needs to have a gender. Based on the gender, it will either be masculine or feminine, or you can speak about it based on plurality. Subclassifying of the ism, it happens in grammar. Every book of grammar will have a section that subclassifies the ism. For our introductory theory, what we'll do is we'll do it once. Okay, and we'll subclassify the ism based on being derived or not being derived. Okay, because this is somewhat relevant to our purpose right now, because we're introducing grammar and morphology deals with derivation, the process of how letters connect together and are voweled on particular configurations of vowels that give us the tense, the voice, and the added connotations. So this can happen in verbs. Actually, it happens in verbs universally. Every verb involves this. Okay, it also happens in ism. So you can have an ism which is constructed, and it involves base letters, and it has a particular vowel configuration. Okay, but then it's a noun. Okay, so when speaking about derivative, one second, just give me a second here. What we're talking about is we're talking about a family of words that all have the same letters. The consonants are the same, because remember in the first video we told you that meanings are created by taking 3 letters from the alphabet and grouping them in groups of 3. Noon, Sad, and Ra, when grouped in that order, give us the meaning of helping, to help. Now what that means is that if it occurs in 100 words, all 100 words would have the meaning of help. But then they'll all be unique and they'll be different. It's the particular configuration of vowels that conveys the base letter meaning in a unique way, that allows for the conveyance of the base letter meaning in a unique way. Now many of those will be verbs, some of them will be isms. So it will either involve that process or it won't. If it doesn't involve that process at all, then that's called jamid, and that's the one on the far right. A jamid is an ism that does not involve a process of derivation. It wasn't derived from anything and nothing was derived from it, and this is normally what the English people call noun. The majority of nouns like tree, the sun, the moon, the earth, house. Okay, so basically they're just coined and frozen. Jamid literally means frozen. So the word rajul, for example, means man, and that would be an example of a jamid ism because it's not constructed. It was coined. That ra, that jim, and that lam, the earliest Arab people took those 3 letters and assigned it the meaning of man. Same thing for woman, same thing for boy, same thing for girl. Okay, now the rest of them, if you take out the jamids, the rest of them, just pretend there are 100 words that all have the same base letters. From those 100, 1 will be the source, and the other 99 would be considered created from the source or constructed from the source using the rules of sarf. You see, so sarf talks about masdar and mushtaq. Sarf does not talk about jamid. So that's one takeaway from here. Okay, so where do you get the meanings of jamid? You get them from the dictionary. One by one, no process. Isolated. Frozen. Jamid means frozen. Okay, now the other 100, okay, like if I had a whiteboard here, I'd write like 12, 13, 14 examples of words in Arabic that all have the same base letters but are all different. Like nasara, yansuru, unsur, nasrun, nasirun, mansurun. Or take the word sajada, yasjudu, masjid, sujud, sajid, masjud. You see that? Or katib, yaktubu, uktub. You see, uktub means write, it's a command verb. Kataba means wrote. Yaktubu means writes, will write. Katib is writer. And then we have the word kitabah, which means to write. In the prostrating example, the word sujud means prostration. Prostration, verbal noun. Okay, and then the rest of them, many of them will be verbs, and some of them will be nouns. You see? Okay, so from the 100 that may have the same letters, one of them will be the source, and the other 99 will be derived. And from those 99, many of them will be verbs, and some of them will be isms. You see? So now the question is, which one's the source? So the grammar people have identified, okay, through their reasoning process, that the one that's the most basic in terms of meaning, we're going to call that the launching pad. Masdar means launching pad, and that is the verbal noun, what in English they call the gerund, or the infinitive. Okay, like hitting and helping and sitting and standing. I'm talking about the act of hitting and the act of helping and sitting and standing and eating and drinking. That's called the masdar. So it's an actual word. So we're not talking about letters anymore. We're talking about words. So these 3 categories you're seeing underneath isms are actual words that can occur in sentences. The one on the far right is frozen in the sense that it does not involve any process of derivation. The other 2 involve the process, and from the other 2, one of them is the source and the other is the one that's created from the source. Jamid, masdar, and mushtaq. Hopefully this is pretty clear. Let's go ahead and give you some examples for it. Okay, look underneath. On the right side, underneath jamid, we have the word rajul, which means man, and the word shajara, which means tree. Notice that they're both nouns. They're pure nouns. So there's no hitting or helping or sitting or standing. There's no verb-like meaning in there. There's no action component to it. It's just a noun. It's a reference to an object or a person. So rajul and shajara are examples of jamid. On the other hand, we have aklun and shurbun. Aklun means eating and shurbun means drinking. In other words, the act of eating and the act of drinking. So there's action, there's no tense. Because if you have a tense, then it becomes a verb. You see, and it's not what we're talking about anymore, right? So that's called masdar, launching pad. And then the words that are created from the masdar, we have the word nasir, which means helper. Notice that it has the noon, the sad, and the ra that can be found in dozens of other words. Okay, so it has the family, it's part of the family. So nasir is an example of a word which was created from nasrun. Nasrun means to help, and nasir is helper. Katib is writer, so it comes from a word that means to write, from which other words are created, like wrote, writes, will write. Masjid is the place of prostration, and it comes from the word prostration, which is the verbal noun. Verbal noun, like laziness or confusion, or hitting or helping or sitting or standing or eating or drinking. So masjid is an example of mushtaq, derived ism. So now in the science of sarf, later when we're done with all of the verbs, we'll give you the categories of the verbal, the derived isms. They're called derived isms, and there's like 5 of them, and we're going to give you the pattern associated to each one of them, and that's pretty much all you need, inshallah. So for now, just remember the terms jamid, masdar, and mushtaq. Jamid is a frozen ism that's not created from anything, nothing's created from it. Masdar is the word that's not created from anything, but many words are created from it, and this corresponds to the infinitive in English, or the gerund. It could be translated both ways. Aklu could be translated eating, and it could also be translated to eat. Okay, and shurb means to drink or drinking. And mushtaq is any ism that's created from the masdar, just like verbs are created. So it would be within the domain of sarf to talk about the mushtaq and tell you the amount of ways it can happen, the amount of ways that base letters could be put on particular patterns to give you isms. Like the word masjid is an example, the word katib is an example, and I think that's sufficient for this topic. Let's move forward. Now the fi'l is categorized into 3 types, and there's no fourth, and this is exhaustive, and there's only one categorization of the verb, which is an intrinsic constitutive division. In other words, it's like taking the animal or substance and dividing it into solids, liquids, and gases. Okay, because that is the division. Like a substance, it divides into a solid, a liquid, and a gas, and then the liquid could either be a beverage or non-beverage, and then the beverage could either be juice, or it could be wine, or it could be some other type of drink, like water. Okay, so this is a division of the fi'l which is just once. We just do it once. In the case of the ism, it could be done numerous times based on numerous considerations. Like what we did on the previous slide was based on derivision. I could have done it based on gender. We would have resulted in different categories. If I did it based on plurality, the number of categories resulting would be different. You see that? So if they ask you the question, how many types of isms are there? The proper reply would be to say, based on what? Okay, so you'd have to specify what consideration. If they say based on derivision, then you give them what we gave you on the previous slide. You see that? So more on that later, because our point in this introductory theory is not to exhaust all of grammar. It's just to build some reserves. So when we begin the reading text, then we can start referring to these terms. So the division of the fi'l is more constitutive. In other words, it's more intrinsic, and this is it. If they ask you how many types of verb, you don't have to retort back with another question and say based on what. Just go ahead and give them these 3 types. What are they? Number 1, the imperfect. Number 1, the perfect. The past tense verb is called madi. The second one's the imperfect, which is the present future one. And the third verb is the command verb, amr. Now, through starting from the next video in week 1, we're going to develop for you the madi verb. So that means that we'll give you the model pattern, the 3 consonants, how exactly do we vowel them in order to create past tense, and then we'll give you the designated endings that are attached to the end of the verb to give us the gender, the plurality, and the person of the verb. And by combining those 2 pieces of information, you have a table. And then the rest of the time will be spent on talking about the variations of the past. In week 3, we introduced for you the mudari verb, method of construction, along with the endings in order to create the entire table. And then further down we'll talk about the amr. So let's give you some basic examples now, and let's continue forward. So the madi is the past tense verb. Example is kataba, it means wrote. Mudari is the present and future tense verb, same verb, if you want to indicate present or future. So yansuru, it not only means helps, but it can also mean will help, and the context would determine, because when the word is used, it's not going to be used on its own. It's going to be used coupled with surrounding words. So from there you'd be able to tell whether the speaker is speaking about the present or is he attempting to indicate on the future. Yansuru, pretty straightforward, and it's easily distinguishable from the other one. The other one doesn't have a letter at the front. It's just kataba. The 3 letters are all you have. And in the case of the mudari, we have a ya at the front, which could change to a ta. It could be tansuru, or it could be ansuru, or it could be nansuru, depending on the particular conjugation. Remember, all of these exist in tables of 14. You see, and we have to develop them. So in week 3, we're going to give you everything you need to know about the present tense verb. You can call it the present tense verb. More precise way of describing it is the imperfect verb, because imperfect means it hasn't completed yet. Imperfect means it's either ongoing, it's happening now, or it hasn't even started yet, right? And our third verb is the command, the imperative, and the example of that is ishrab. It means drink. Okay, now we're drawing to a close now. Okay, now we're talking about the harf. The harf is the particle, and this includes the 3 English parts of speech: prepositions, conjunctions, and articles. And this divides into 2 categories. Then again, it's a constitutive division. If they ask you the question, how many kinds of verbs are there? Then this is what you say. You say the particles divide into either the governing agent or the non-governing agent. Amil and ghair amil. Okay, now what does it mean to govern and what does it mean to not govern? So we're going to speak about this. And this was in the report and it was in the accompanying training videos. So if you want further details on this, then you can spend more time on the report and the training videos. And I'm going to introduce for you the emotions analogy and the pronouns analogy. So this is the first exposure, and then we're going to revisit the topic again in week 3. And at that point, we'll remove any inaccuracies that will have occurred through today's first introduction of the topic. So the big question is, what does it mean to govern, and what does it mean to not govern? So we start with the analogy to the emotional states. So remember, our point right now is not to take it to 100%, but just to give it a 30-40% introduction, and then in order to revisit it again, come back to the topic again, and repeat what we're about to say right now, and build on it and give you more in the second introduction of the topic. And then eventually the book will begin, and you'll get to see it in action, and all of this theory will come to life as soon as the reading text begins. So human beings experience emotional states. People make us happy, angry, sad, frustrated, embarrassed. This happens because of interaction with other humans. People treat us in different ways. Sometimes they satisfy our expectations, other times they disappoint us. So this creates within us emotions, and then these emotions are reflected on our faces. So by looking at the person's face, you can tell whether they're happy or they're sad. So Arabic words behave in a similar fashion. Words influence words. Words interact with other words. And then these so words experience grammatical states, and then these states are reflected on the last letter. So that's the analogy. The human beings' emotional states reflect on the face. Arabic words' grammatical states reflect on the last letter. So particular vowel on the last letter will tell you how this word is behaving, and how this word, what kind of state is this word experiencing. So it's by the last letter. And unlike human emotions, which are endless, grammatical states in Arabic are just 4, and from the 4 is 3 that we're concerned with. And those 3 are rafa, which corresponds to he. The second one's nasab, which corresponds to him. And the third one's jar, which corresponds to his. He, him, and his. Okay, so just by understanding the differences between he, him, and his, it takes you 30-40% of the way to understanding fully what grammatical states in Arabic are all about. So why do they have 3 variations for the pronoun, singular, masculine, third person, in English? It's because the pronoun could be used in different ways. So depending on how the pronoun is used, you would choose one of these 3. When the pronoun is intended to be the doer of the verb, you would say he came. And when the pronoun is intended to be the object of the verb, you would say I saw him. And when the pronoun is part of a possessive structure, you would say his pen. So there you go. He, him, and his. He came, I saw him, and his pen. Now this, in English, only happens in pronouns. It doesn't happen in nouns. So if a particular noun is occurring in 3 different sentences and being used differently, then it would be the same. Like the house, for example, collapsed. I entered the house. Door of the house. It doesn't change. But in Arabic, it would actually change. You see? And you see this on the next screen. So if I want to say the house fell, the word al-bayt means house. So saqat al-bayt too. It has a particular ending, and that ending is a dhamma, and that dhamma is like a smile. So it's indicating rafa. If I say dakhaltu al-bayta, I entered the house, the word al-bayt has a different ending. And now it's object. Babul bayti, that's the possessive example. door of the house, and it has a different ending. So al-baytu, al-bayta, al-bayti. This is what it means to experience a grammatical state. So pretty much the earlier word is what causes it to the upcoming word. So in the saqat al-bayt example, saqata would be the governing agent. In the dakhaltu example, dakhaltu would be the governing agent. Dakhaltu means I entered. I entered the house, causing al-bayt to be in the state of nasab. So what is rafa, nasab, and jar? These are names of three grammatical states. And rafa corresponds to subject, nasab corresponds to object, and jar corresponds to possessive. Now, go back to what we told you earlier when we spoke about the verb and the two nouns, and we said that every language needs to have a mechanism in order to distinguish between the roles, so you know which of the nouns is the one doing the verb, which of the nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. In Arabic, sequence does not determine the grammar. So if I have the verb daraba, which means hit, and I line it up with Zayd and Amr, and I want to say Zayd hit Amr, I will say Zaydun Amran. Daraba Zaydun Amran. And if I want to say Amr hit Zayd, I can leave it the way it is, in the sense that Zayd still first and Amr still at the end, but I would switch the vowels at the end, and I would say Zaydan Amrun, and now it means Amr hit Zayd. And it would be an example of delaying the subject to the very end of the sentence, and it would be one of the 5 unconventional methods. And more on this later, inshallah, when we revisit the topic in week 3. But we were talking about harf. If you notice, we launched into the discussion because harf was 2 types. We had a governing agent harf and a non-governing agent harf. If you look on the screen, there's the example of the word ma and the example of the word fi. Ma is a harf, it means not. Nasara is a past tense verb, helped. Ma nasara, he did not help. Did not help. So obviously take away the ma, it becomes affirmative, and have the ma, it becomes negative. But nasara would be nasara in both examples. In the affirmative example, it will be nasara. In the negative example, it's ma nasara. So clearly, ma is not changing the way the upcoming word looks. So ma is an example of a non-governing agent. And if you look at fil bayti, the word al-bayt has a kasra on the last letter, and fi is what induced that kasra. So what does it mean to govern? What does it mean to not govern? Govern means it's influencing the upcoming word in the sense that it's giving it a particular ending, it's inducing a vowel on the last letter. Now nasara has a fatha, but ma did not induce that fatha, because if you take away the ma, it's still nasara. You see that? So this is your first exposure at the process of governing, and we're going to develop this further in week 2 and also in week 3. Inshallah. And I think that's sufficient for this session. And again, I'd recommend that you read the report, watch the training videos that accompany the report, and we have our final session, inshallah. In it, we'll develop for you the past tense verb. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.